Hey, Lucky.
Toddy, hello.
Hello. Good morning. Hey, Brandon. Victor.
Hey there, Toddy.
How is life treating you?
Oh, life is treating me busy even when I don't have things I'm billing for, which is surprising. Usually you would think when you're billing, you're busy, and you're not billing, you're still busy. And like something's not adding up here.
Yeah,
Accountants say the same thing.
that's true.
So I didn't see anyone else put in agenda items on there, so I threw one out there, but I'm also happy to postpone if other people have things they want to talk about. The one I did put up there was 1025. I'll move some wires around so I can share a screen, because I feel like it's easier if you're sharing a screen on these things. With the downside that then it's harder for me to follow the chat. But that just means everybody can say fun stuff while I'm not paying attention, right? No, I'll take the fun away. I'll go ahead and monitor the chat too. The thing I liked about 1025 is that I feel like we had all these different options up here of what we can do, and it gave a nice visibility of what we want to pick from this whole list of everything that's happening. And my thought process, if we can look through this and say, okay, one option looks better than the other, let's pick it and let's go with it. That might help us decide which of these other PRs, which direction we're going to go with some of these things. We got a lot of PRs sitting out there of different directions to go. So from this, has anybody had time to look at this and object to anything that's in here? I know we're still waiting on a couple of answers from like GCR and AR, but my suspicion is that the zero layer is probably a no over here. I'm hoping the scratch layer is a yes. And in that hope, I'm kind of turned toward John, but I'm realizing that John probably hadn't time to really look at this.
I have not looked at that yet.
Yeah. The zero layer, I'll go down to these. The zero layer looks like this. It was my original comment of, I had heard that GCR has issues with this when you push a manifest with size 0. That's only secondhand knowledge. The other option that I liked better was thrown out there of saying, well, what if we just define it like this, where you've got this SHA here, which is the double brackets, same as this SHA here. So what you put in the config is pretty much empty. It's nothing but that one little blob. You do push a layer, but it's the same as what's in the config. Media type might be different, but it's, for all purposes, it's an empty. There's nothing there but those 2 bytes. And I think any client seeing that would treat that as basically empty at that point. And they would know to treat as empty is because they're looking at this media type. They know what they're supposed to do with this media type here. And so they know, okay, my media type says I don't care what these blobs are, just ignore those blobs because I'm supposed to be doing X with this. I'm not supposed to be looking at all the blobs. Given that, everybody's quiet when I talk. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I like to talk over VBATs, and VBATs likes to talk over me, and we just go back and forth on this stuff. Looking through this scratch layer column here, which is the one we were looking at the end, I'm seeing a lot of checks. I'm not seeing any X's. And the other nice thing about that last one is that it required 0 changes to our spec. I feel like we want to document what it is to clarify, but we don't have to actually change anything. We don't have to modify what's in the spec today. We just document when you see this, it's valid according to the spec, other than a media type not really representing what's really under the covers, but you can do it today. We don't have to change the spec to do it. It works with all the registries. It just kind of felt like a really good option to me. Are there people that are pro con on that one?
If nothing else, I think it demonstrates the best avenue for fallback support. If I could sidestep answering the question.
Yeah, I definitely understand the community wants an artifact manifest. I've heard that loud and clear. So for everybody that says that, you're not being ignored. I hear you. I know that that's wanted, but I'm just looking for, we know we have enough contention going back and forth. My goal right now is to say, if we need to define the fallback, let's get that defined. Let's get a 1.1 out, and then let's circle back and try to figure out how we do the artifact manifest, because I think it's still something we want to do. At least some of us want to do. And so let's do the easy problems first and then work on the hard problems later. All right, so if we do this, I think that eliminates a couple of the PRs that are out there to VBAT's disappointment. Yeah, Aaron, go ahead.
I think my only concern about this is it feels like the specification is going down the road to look like X509's use of ASN.1, where we've got sort of a fractal degree of complexity in the image manifest, where parsing one is highly context dependent. Things like descriptors don't actually, when you need to update descriptor, for example, and I commented this on 999, is the media type of a descriptor is no longer the media type of the blob associated with it. We're adding a lot of if statements.
We've already got that today.
Well, the specification says the media type must be the content of the blob, must describe the content of the blob. So I'm just saying, like, we're adding a lot of sort of caveats to the existing specification here when we accept something like this. That's my concern, is that this pushes a lot of complexity down into implementations in the future.
Yeah, I know this isn't quite the spec, but But there is guidance out there that says when you do this stuff, the way you push an artifact manifest is to go ahead and do this. What we've seen from a lot of end users out there today is that they would push it with a special config blob that actually was a config media type of some kind. But for the most part, what we said is you change that one media type in that one field, and that was what we defined in this artifact repo. And so this was guidance that I think we're hoping to move out of this repo and back into the image. And so that's why we're seeing this stuff that looks a little bit weird coming back over into the image spec. It's just because we're trying to take this knowledge that's out there already, where we say, hey, when you see something that has this other media type over there, handle it differently. And that's how we document it before another repo. And so we're just getting this into one place. Phil, I see you off mute, but I don't know if that's just you not muting or you just had something to say.
Oh, sorry. I think Zoom defaults to off mute when you join, and I didn't.
That's all right. I wanted to make sure you had a chance to say something to you.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that was my big thing in here. Are there other agenda items I'm cutting off, or are there other agenda items that people want to talk about?
I added an agenda item to discuss 1028,
Sure.
which is so we have a number of places in the specification where in some places we have used must ignore errors, and other places there's this word ignored, and it's been kind of unclear to me what ignoring means in some places. So I've changed the use of ignore in those places to must not generate errors. That is all.
It gets a thumbs up from me. I'll go through and do a proper review on that later on. I've got one sitting out there that's similar, addressing one item, one other place. So you might want to get both of those together.
Do we have ideas around addressing TNON's concern?
I think that's where I was going with my PR, was that I was calling out specifically client versus registry ignore. And a registry ignore means that you've got content addressable content. The digest doesn't change, the content doesn't change. You just return back exactly what you received. For a client ignore means, hey, I received a bunch of JSON. I know how to do something with 5/9 of it. Then you only work on the 5/9 that you know how to work with.
Yeah, I definitely agree with some sort of way of clarifying client versus registry. I think it gets a little bit tricky when you think about things like pass-through proxies or tools like Aura's CP, where those should behave more like the registry version of the spec as opposed to the client, right? Is that they should faithfully copy manifests, blobs, layouts. So I wasn't sure how to articulate that in response to Tian's comment.
Yeah, the phrasing I used was along the lines of the content addressable stored. So if you're a pull-through proxy, you're working on the content addressability of the data. I'll go dig my own up, get them linked together. Yep, mine was issue 90 or PR 902. And so I'll get that linked in your PR and also put in the notes here.
Yeah, Tian's comment, my memory of this was, it was to make sure that the registry stored what was pushed so that in response on the get, you would get the same response that you push. Even if you couldn't parse the schema, Tian, the expectation is would be that you would store the original, not the parse version. Okay.
So the question that comes up for me there is, if you're not parsing it, how do you know which objects are children of it?
You would of course need to parse it for the purpose of processing, but then when you actually store it in the registry, you would store the original version. We make a copy of that.
I mean, the registry is a content addressable store. It can't really work any other way. You have to store the original verbatim object because that's
Right.
how the protocol works.
Okay.
But you have to parse the object to some degree to know which children it has so that you can manage the graph correctly.
Right.
So it has to have at least some knowledge of that object.
Yeah, and
How
of
to
course,
parse it.
at least one of these new fields, subject, right, creates a little bit of an issue there.
I don't think there's anything in the specification that requires a registry to understand future versions of OCI and be able to parse. For example, if we added a subjects field that allowed an image or artifact to refer to multiple manifests, like that would just not, an OCI 1.1 registry would just not understand that. And yeah, it would potentially not understand the children properly, but does that answer your question, Tiana?
I'll say kind of related to that, when we added the subject field to the image spec, I think the assumption was that registries that knew how to work with OCI 1.0 stuff would see this. They wouldn't parse the subject field at all, and they wouldn't do any GC or anything else, any kind of graph basis off that subject field. And that was okay with our design because the way we laid it out. So maybe it needs to come along that, hey, in the first iteration of any media type that we introduce to a registry, you need to know how to handle all those initial values, but going forward, any new values, we understand that a registry might not know how to process any new fields in there. John?
Yeah. So this kind of gets down to like my objections to artifact manifest as it is currently defined today as a static set of fields that all implementations need to learn about, because it doesn't solve this problem we're talking about of, oh, if we evolve the spec further, then we need to update everything again. Obviously, you need to update clients that care about additions to the document, but there are a lot of implementations like things that copy stuff or things that store stuff without running or modifying them that would operate just fine without actually knowing the semantics of new fields. If artifact manifests were defined in such a way that I could write a correct registry that would work even if you added the subjects field with, you know, a list of descriptors, I wouldn't really have any objections to it. It's just that we are not solving this problem of extensibility, which would be like, I'm willing to take the cost of, oh, this doesn't work with old registries, everyone's gonna have to update everything, that's annoying, if we do it once and not every time we're going to change things going forward. So like, I'm interested in solving that problem today and not again later when we add another field. Otherwise, I think it's not worth adding the artifact manifest. Yeah, I don't know where I was going.
So,
but like this is the point of 999 is like, can we solve this?
so my own feeling for 999, I don't know if you had a chance to look at my PR review on there. I'm looking at saying, let's go ahead and get through that. And by get through that, saying approve 999. But then circle back to your question of how do we make an artifact that everybody does like? And the reason for saying go ahead and do that and then follow through later on is just to get the 1.1 release out, because I think people want that refer subject field in there for other stuff right now. I see frowns, even though I'm saying I want to approve your PR.
I'm reading chat.
Okay. On that north south though, and I think probably to Tiana's comment there, does it make sense for some kind of logic to say when we start up a new media type, any new media type that we create, that from the registry side, when they're maintaining some kind of knowledge graph of what's under there, that they're only expected to do that on the first iteration of whatever we create. That way, if we extend it and add new fields, that we understand registries won't necessarily know what that knowledge graph looks like when we modify it.
Sorry to come in late to the conversation, but I'm still having a hard time understanding what the objection is. Is it because you're adding a brand new manifest, or is it something else?
I feel like we could spend 5 hours answering that question.
I can do a 30-second version of my objection.
Go ahead. I'll see if I can infer things from it.
So there exists the open containers / artifacts repository that describes how to use an image manifest to store non-image content. There also exists the artifact manifest that I'm trying to remove in pull request 999. They are functionally the same from my perspective. I think some people disagree with that, but adding this artifact manifest has, in my opinion, no benefits, but has drawbacks that existing clients and registries won't work with it. And it causes a lot of churn in the ecosystem to get to the point where those would work with it. And it doesn't solve the problem that it introduces of, oh, when we add a new media type, everything breaks and we have to update everything. Yeah, if any of those things weren't true, I would feel differently. But it's like, yeah, we're adding a new manifest type that breaks everything and we don't get anything new. Why are we adding it?
I'll make an attempt to summarize the other side quickly. Hopefully I'll be able to do it, which is that we would be able to differentiate between image content and artifact non-image content. So abstract artifact content just by the media type, not looking at the embedded config descriptor. And the config descriptor itself needs to point to some kind of blob. We don't necessarily always want to have a blob in there. If we just want to note that, hey, this is an artifact of this type, we don't necessarily need a descriptor for the config, and we don't always need to have blobs in there depending on what the thing is. And so those three things feel like it's different enough for a lot of people if they want to be able to use it. the challenge I think we're looking at is that there's a lot of push and pull between both sides right now. And so what we're looking at is just to say temporarily shelve it, circle back later on, but shelve it so that we can get the 1.1 release out with the subject and refers field. And then we can figure out how we can get this in the future.
So it seems to me, John, that you don't see, you think that the solution that is in the artifacts repository is sufficient, despite the fact that we had created a list of requirements indicating that it's not.
Yes.
I'll defend John there in saying that everything we did in our requirements, you can do without the artifact manifest. We can implement and push abstract data of whatever type we want to. You can push Helm charts today without having the artifact manifest.
Okay, I will say that one of the requirements it doesn't do is that subject and referrers pointing. It does that using tags. But
we added the subject. We add the subject to the image manifest, and so we can extend image manifest. Go ahead, Mike.
I was just trying. It's all there, Nisha. The only thing that's missing is a new type, a new manifest type. But the concept is still there because you can change the config media type for the image to whatever type you want it to be, which includes context, which includes the context that it may not be layers of an executable. It may be a blob.
There's a lot of confusion out there that's conflating the artifact manifest with pushing an artifact within an image manifest. And what we're saying is you can push an artifact in the image manifest because we already have the image manifest. You don't need the new manifest to do this stuff.
Yeah, it's not necessary.
So what happens if a client that is, what happens to a client that is pulling this image manifest, expecting it to be a container and finds a...
He'll need to check. He'll need to check.
They see today the config media type is different. So when they pull down that image manifest, they see the config media type and say, I don't know what that config media type is. I'm looking for either a Docker config or an OCI config, and this is a Helm chart. I don't know what to do with that. And they failed that point.
Okay, so that means that there has to be, well, so one of the issues with that is you have to say in the config media type, in the config, that it is some like null media type or some other media type.
You should do that. Yeah.
That also gets in, if you're talking about the media type of the config, you can do that in the descriptor. If you're talking about the blob content of the config, that's where we've got some disagreement here of saying we're going to set a config media type that says I am X, even though the blob that's there is just a couple of curly brackets. It's not actually X. And so we might need to, as a spec authors here, say, here's how we're going to handle that kind of confusion.
Yeah, I mean, if it is, if the confusion is just, writing restrictions on what kind of media type goes into the image manifest, I think that's fine. But we have to make those changes I don't see any alternatives beyond that. I think we did talk about that too, like restricting or having a list of like allowed media types from IANA, but we decided against maintaining a list of allowed media types, like because we didn't want to
Yeah.
restrict clients.
Yeah, we've tried as best we can not to put that into the spec just because we don't know what someone's going to create later on the next day. And we don't want the spec to be the maintainers of that list. So the general recommendation is that it ideally is an IANA registered media type. If not, is at least in the format of an IANA media type. And so follows their spec on how that should be formatted with the something/something else.
And I have to check back to the image spec because last time I checked, I didn't see a subject in the image.
It was added.
That was part of the
okay.
working group. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I just didn't see it in the open container.
Check the reply. I put a link to the line of where it's actually there this morning.
Thanks, Mike.
It's confusing because his PR is reverting a portion of the output of the working group.
Everything's on main.
Everything's on main already. Yep.
Yeah.
It caught me too, Nisha, when I first looked at it. It's like, wait, why are you removing it? No, it's there.
So I think got the handful of issues there. We've got defining what the minimal manifest is. I think there's somewhat agreement. I hope there's agreement. We'll find out when I submit the PR to start documenting some of this stuff. To go with that last column, to say we're just going to use the double bracket. We've got some agreement on what ignore means, but we might need to work on some phrasing here and there. But I think there's a rough agreement on what ignore means. I think the other thing is
the double bracket in Unicode. You might need 4. But
it's the curly bracket, and it comes through as 2 bytes. It's basically an empty JSON body, an empty JSON object.
Oh, so just one curly, not the close. All right.
No, it's 1023. That PR has the definition. I think we should make that in before, or at least just immediately after 999. If either way.
Yeah, I think documenting that content is good, but I think we also want to document that when someone is using that is probably more up to when they specify their config media type, their artifact type. As they're doing that, they need to specify as part of their config, as part of their guideline of whatever their artifact is, that this thing doesn't have a blob, this thing doesn't have a config. So ignore these things. They're just stub values there to make the image manifest happy. And so we need to put some documentation in there that says that even though we say that every time you have a descriptor, the media type of the descriptor must be the media type of the content, in this case, we're going to draw an exception there. Everybody's quiet today. Did we work out all the aggression in the previous weeks?
What aggression? It's all good. I think the primary thing that people need to know is the use cases are going to still be there. Okay. They architecturally, one might think it's a little bit ugly, this version. But it's the ugly baby that we've been working with for the last 4 years, and it does work. So it's all good. And some registries may still support other manifest types, and we're not breaking that. It's just we're not going to define it in the spec.
Now, of course, if everybody's being super agreeable today, I'm more than happy to start tackling some of the harder questions. Because that's the time to do it, right? So, John, I'm going to pick on you. You mentioned that you want to see something more out of the artifact manifest to get that added. What's your vision? What would you like to see?
Okay. So there are lots of solutions to this problem, but what I've done for my own purposes is to duck type an JSON parser to see, is this object a descriptor? Oh, it sure is. I'm going to treat that as a relationship to another object within the registry. That is how I have solved this problem. There are other ways to solve this problem, like defining one field, say descriptors or something, or maybe two fields like descriptors and subject. And then the rest of the manifest is just whatever you want. And so you have, registries can parse 2, 3 well-known fields out of the thing that would cover all of the relationships that that manifest has within it. And so let's say config is one of those relationships, then let's say the descriptors field would have config in it, but the config field would also have config. That's another way you could do this. Give registries a static way to parse something, and they can ignore the rest of it. You could define like a map of string to descriptor, or a map of string to list of descriptors, instead of having well-known defined fields that are descriptors. I don't know. There are a bunch of ways to solve this. I like mine, but it's more complicated to implement, certainly. So that's what I would like to see. Like, it would be cool if I could put arbitrary manifests, and as long as they contain XYZ fields, then everything works. That is more or less like what we can already do with image manifest, if you're willing to not use this wrapper situation where the media type of the image manifest is the thing instead of the like artifact type.
Got it. So an extensible V2 image manifest.
Yeah, so registries like no longer care about the content type, right? And so
like how a descriptor is defined today, you would have an image manifest descriptor. With the minimum number of fields that somebody would have to implement for a new manifest.
Yeah, what I imagine it would be like media type, descriptors, and then I guess that's it. Yeah, like that is enough. And then any other fields you can completely ignore or do something with them. So subject would be like a new optional field. And if the registry knows about subject, then it can have the refers API. That is one way I would solve this. But
would you move subject into the descriptor? Into your field descriptor?
So if you want the registry to like maintain invariance around relationships, then you could put the subject descriptor inside the descriptors list as well. Right? This is a way to like hide relationships from the registry too, by not including them in the descriptors field. Something like this. Right? I'm not going to solve this problem like on the spot during this call, but those are some avenues.
Yeah, no. It gives some thought, because one of my thoughts is, from listening to that, the one that caught my attention the most was when you said having a map of a string to a list of descriptors. And I was like, I can see some value there. I could see some people writing artifacts that would like to be able to say, here is all this type of content, all this type of content, each one's a list.
Yeah. The other issue is like the registry is bad by the fact that like we have manifests and blobs stored slightly differently. And so like having one field isn't great. But we could have two, right? You could have manifests, you could have blobs, and those could be two well-known fields for artifact manifest. Then you have the media type would say artifact manifest, and when you put that done, or the media type could say Helm chart or whatever, and registry doesn't care. It just parses manifests and blobs and media type, and it uses that to store it and maintain relationships. And then you can have other fields like Helm thing. I don't actually know anything about Helm, so It's nice, right? You remove certain things. You can promote fields to the top level. You don't have to have annotations.
Yeah. Once you add the manifest in there, then we definitely can't treat the subject field as basically creating that reverse link at that point. And I know you and I have gone back and forth on that a whole bunch of saying, hey, you can't reverse the links, don't cross the streams kind of stuff. And
yeah, I still maintain that position.
The challenge of that is that anytime someone is trying to use that subject field, it becomes very difficult to start walking that path if you're walking it.
Let's hash this out. We have synchronous communication.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't understand the use case of like, I'm going to walk the graph and then follow backwards anything I find and then walk that graph.
You want
Like
an example, huh?
Like
You want an example?
You can do that. Yeah, I mean, like you can do anything, right? Like we have computers. It's just like we have created this way to go backwards for certain reasons, and like you don't have to. But if you are interested in what refers to this thing, then you can. But you know, at the end of the day, it's still a DAG. There's no loops. We only have like a way to go back if you want.
So I'll give you my example. Sorry for the pitter patter of the keystrokes there. But here's just taking an example of a scratch image where I've got the root here. I thought I had media types in there, but I don't have the media types on this stuff anymore. This is a index, and I've got a bunch of children from that index. One is the manifest for 386, another is manifest for 64, ARM-v6, ARM-64, all these different things. Each one of these are image manifest, and then each one of those has some kind of thing laying off of it. This first thing is not great to look at because they're misusing media types, so we'll ignore them for a second. But I've got stuff like Cyclone DX, SPDX, I could have other things in there. They are all things that kind of extend this image. And so if I'm looking for what are all the SBOMs for these images, this is kind of walking that tree in that way. And so it's the logical way I've looked at this so far. And the challenge is if we say this, all of these SBOMs, they're not children of this image. They have a subject that points to that image, but they're not children of that image. And so how do I draw this tree doing this kind of logic without being able to without being able to walk that in reverse?
But it's not a tree, right? Like we don't have a tree. You can't render this as a tree because it's not a tree. That's why it's a problem.
I did render it as a tree.
Well, it's wrong, right? I mean, like it's not a tree. It's a DAG. And so like, you know, you can do this if you only show like one length, like, you know, one hop through refers. If you wanted to show like the refers children, then yeah, you could create a loop, but it's incorrect, right? Like it's not a tree.
Well, as soon as, I mean, if I go one hop here, as soon as I say that Cyclone DX can have itself a manifest as a child or something like that, it becomes very easy to start saying, okay, this thing goes back up to theirs, goes back down. It can be circular at that point.
Yeah, I mean, so don't put children under refers. And like, if you want to render a tree from the refers thing, the Cyclone DX thing, then you have to render that from the start. Like they're different. They're different relationships. They go backwards.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Do we need a get graph API?
I mean, we have
Well,
it.
what John's saying is that these aren't graphs. That you can't really look at this way.
It is a graph. It's not a tree.
Well, it's
Or get tree?
even if it's not a tree.
You're not right. You can't render this as a tree in this way. If refers,
it is not an acyclic. It is not an acyclic tree. It's not a DAG. It's just a G.
It is a DAG. It is. This is a DAG. But there's also on the side the referrers API, and so these things are different. You can render the DAG as a DAG, and you can render the result of the referrers API and like annotate the DAG with that. But you can't render the referrers API as part of the DAG because it's not part of the DAG. So like, I don't see the problem. If so, like this, there's no loop. As long as you don't try to render referrers the same way you render everything else.
Yeah, but all of these are referrers.
So we did bring that bit up in proposal C, and we didn't use it because we didn't want to enforce garbage collection. But yeah, if that's the case, and this seems to be like a problem trying to fit a regular dependency tree into something that is meant for a DAG, then maybe this is more difficult than we thought.
I don't think so. I mean, I might be missing something because I feel like we're talking past each other. Like what you presented here is fine, right? As long as you don't try to, render the children of the Cyclone DX thing, right?
I would though. If Cyclone DX is signed, then I would keep following that down, saying, "Hey, there's something that points to Cyclone DX is signed."
Well,
Just
that's
keep going
wrong.
down.
It's not correct to do that because it's not a tree. So like one thing you could do is the Cyclone DX is like a link, right? And you start to render again from the root. Or like if you want to do this, then you have to do cycle detection in your tree.
Yeah,
in some way.
That's what I ended
Yeah,
up doing.
you
I
have to
found
do you have to do cycle detection, and you have to like write some rules for that.
Yeah,
but like,
And I remember that we did not want to do that when we were talking about this direction.
it's because everything in registries today is assuming there are no cycles.
there
Yeah.
aren't any cycles.
We're adding though.
No, there's over on the side, there's a different thing that you're putting in this view, and it's not the same. It's a category error to like render the refer stuff in the same way as the children, right? Like they're not contained in the DAG. That relationship goes the other way. So if you wanted to render this like properly, then their top level thing would be shifted over, and the referrers would go left.
I completely understand the logic of what you're saying. I'm trying to understand how to take that logic and apply it to the user request, which is, I just want to know that all my images have SBOMs on them and that they have signatures and that kind of stuff. And so how do I give them a view of saying, here's all the metadata on your image? And so,
well, so you've done that already, right? That's the one level of referrers. But if you like, so you could, in your referrers subtree, right, you could show all of the referrers relationships, because that you're going backwards, only backwards there. But you could not show the children relationships under the referrers section. Then you have a loop. And in my opinion, if I'm asking about SHA-256 EA4DA F7, like this top level thing, I only want to know about that. Like, I don't care about something being signed that's a child of a sibling of this node, right? That's like outside of the light cone of my DAG, as like I think Linus put it at one point, talking about get bisect. Like it's unreachable from this artifact, my like cousin, So I don't care that my cousin's signed or not. You might care that the Cyclone DX thing is signed, which you could show through the referrers API, but you don't need to show that like the Cyclone DX thing has a child that's also signed, right?
So Cyclone DX itself might not have a child that's signed, but Cyclone DX itself might be signed. So you're following a refer on refer.
Yeah, that's fine. You can do that. As long as you only follow referrers relationships under the referrer section.
And not
You are
manifest.
good at cycle. Sorry?
And not manifest, because you're kind of walking up the tree rather than back down the tree.
Right.
You're
Yeah.
saying.
And I think that satisfies the user request, is like, show me things that are signed that point to this. And so this seems right to me.
It's one of those things that seems right until I get people saying, hey, I want to sign a blob. I want to have some kind of complex artifact that has multiple fields in there, and maybe there's going to be something on one of those 12 fields they added.
Yeah, I mean that it's not reachable from the route that you've been given. Like, it's irrelevant to the thing that you've been given. Like, if E7C,
to me, none of these are reachable from the route. The route I was given was up here, this EA. Everything that says refers, they're not under the same route. They're under a different route.
Right, but they are relevant to your route, right? That's like why the refers API exists. Like, I want to know about my route. If you wanted to know about things in your route, you can go down, down the graph, find everything that is referenced by my route, and then go back up from there. And as long as you're only going up, you're never going to have a cycle. But like, if there's not something that's reachable from my route, I don't care about it. Otherwise, your artifact is incomplete. Like, you're not referencing something that is relevant to it. Like, if you wanted to, parse the Cyclone DX thing, yeah, that's something you would do. But like, it's irrelevant to the request. Show me everything that is related to this object.
Until this thing has, if I only go up, then they have to sign the manifest. They can't sign the blob within that. They can't sign like a child manifest of the Cyclone DX. If I want to show that this is a signed Cyclone DX.
Is that a restriction that we're considering? Or are you just talking about it?
Signing the blob of the Cyclone DX thing shouldn't really be relevant, I would think, right? Like, if you care about the Cyclone DX thing, you would sign that. I mean, signing a blob separately makes sense, but like, you don't need to get that blob, the blob's signature, until you actually request that blob.
And I'm just kind of creating examples to work through this here. So to answer your question, Mike, am I considering that? Not really. I'm just kind of working through all the implications of what we're saying.
Okay.
And are you only thinking about it from the context of artifacts, blobs, or are you also thinking, Brendan, with layers?
Well, that's where I was trying to get at. If we make an artifact manifest that has arbitrary manifests as its children, things get really complicated here really quickly. When we started off and said artifacts can only have blobs, that collapsed a layer of the complexity here, and we didn't have to worry about things.
But it is an interesting pattern, because if you're signing the base, the base layer of something that's been updated, then maybe you can go ahead and check what that how it was signed, or what the contents were on each layer. Might be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our APIs right now, everything we do, this was kind of taking that and extending it a whole lot, because all the commands we have now says, I've got this digest up the top, give me all the refers to it. And from the sample, there are none. There are 0 refers, but there are all these SBOMs on each of the individual manifests. And that's kind of something that users might want to see. They might be interested in that. When we invent new artifacts with new kinds of content in there, there can be new use cases.
And those use cases, I think, are supported, but only if you consider this thing as a DAG and not a tree, right? Like, all those things work. You just aren't able to render them in your command line view of a tree.
Well, the tree is a DAG, right? A DAG isn't a tree, but a tree is a DAG.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can render certain DAGs this way, but other DAGs, it's not correct.
Well, it's directed as acyclic. You can always have a tree rendered out of a DAG, though. You start from the root, you're always going down. You're always going to find every branch in there.
Not so right, but you're rendering not a DAG. You're rendering a DAG and also the refers API.
I'm rendering, like Sajay said, and I think you've also said in things, it's basically a polytree. It's multiple trees. It's multiple DAGs. This isn't a DAG. This is multiple DAGs.
Yeah, so which is why, like, I think it's fine to do this if like I can, go from here to the refers thing and show that as a tree, but you can't embed under that the DAG, because then it's not DAG anymore.
According to what's being shown here, it seems right, because those are child manifests or like manifests of EA4D, right?
Yes, this is the manifest list, and these are
right. And the referers are separate roots, actually speaking. So you could have children to each one of those, which is the Cyclone DX could have other blobs or things like that, but it could also have other referers, which would be again more roots. So it gets really complicated to render this.
Right, and I mean, yeah, exactly. It's not a DAG. You can't render it this way if you like treat refers the same way you treat children, because they're opposite directions.
But layer signing has come up. We've been kind of like debating and discussing that for patching. So certain layers are signed, and we want to be able to kind of like patch them if those layers are signed. And that's kind of why Vincent was opening that previous PR to be able to attach signatures to layers. I know it's very far out, but at least this group want to be able to kind of like get to that at some point in time where we can attach a signature to a set of layers and then not worry about the manifest of how it was composed. And as long as you can treat the entire chain up to that point as a valid set of content produced by somebody in some form. That's the history for where we're thinking about it.
And that sounds like something that could be useful for something like build packs as well, right? Like where you have things for the container image separated into very distinct things. The other thing I was thinking about is, leveraging some aspect of composition, right? Like you have a SBOM that's split out for every layer, and then you can compose the aggregate SBOM. I don't think any of that works today with the specs on either side, but like, is it interesting an idea? How much time we spent talking about it and where we go when we get there. I don't know.
Yeah, but that was me puttering away at the command line. There was not me trying to show too much on the command line. To Tian's point there, it's more just showing the concept of why someone would want to look at this as a tree. And I was going to show, and I failed. There is another ORS command that does pretty much the same thing. I was just replicating some functionality from over there. So it's not simply one project doing that. I think there's a value for a lot of projects that are looking at doing this.
Explaining a DAG to a CLI scenario is really complicated. So I think we kind of stick with some simple terms and sometimes pollute the actual usage here. The fact doesn't change that we have the root SHA to start with, and maybe calling out the referrers as a side relationship is probably the right thing to do in some way. I don't know how to make it prettier on a CLI.
Not even thinking about CLIs, thinking about garbage collection, thinking about all these other, if I want to copy this root to another registry, I want to do a recursive copy of all the content. You're going to follow that tree. And so all the tooling that gets written on this going forward that used to be able to assume that everything it was touching was a DAG is now going to have to be updated to assume that it's going to be on a multi-rooted DAG at that point, and potentially a circular one.
Hmm.
And of course, we lost John, so the main proponent of all these things.
At that point, do we have a Turing complete container registry?
Avoid that answer as best I can here. Yeah, the one comment you did make, though, was that did get my attention earlier, was how we can extend the artifact to make it more complex. And so I think that shows that maybe there is a point here coming up. Oh, that's where everybody's dropping off. We're at the top of the hour. Thinking of how we can extend this in the future. That would be interesting. And so hopefully everybody hearing us table this stuff and saying we don't want to do artifacts today, but maybe tomorrow, that gives you hope that what comes tomorrow is still going to be useful to you and we're not giving up on you just yet. Sound good? Hold out hope. Till next week. All right. Cheers all.